Number 3 is rolling his toilet paper. He has to be smart. He needs to save up. He goes to wipe and it wasn't enough. And right now he's pissed. Okay, let's hold a second here. He is making 40 million wons per day and he's counting the pieces of toilet paper? No, this is enough. He picks up the intercom and he orders a porta potty. He picks the intercom again and he's like, is that refundable? I mean, at the end of the day, the purchase was silly. I'm not sure if toilet paper comes with the porta potty. Then again, how many times when we feel pissed, we make our own unnecessary purchases? Buying something makes us feel good. And I'm not gonna lie, it's one of my toxic traits. This is part 2 of analyzing the crazy Korean drama called The 8 Show. I mean, if you liked Squid Game, this is this is another level. This makes you reevaluate everything that you know. If you haven't watched the first part, I would recommend to start there so you even know who are the people that I'm talking about, what is with the numbers, and what is this all about. It is a hella interesting way that gives us an inside look of how the whole system that we potentially live in actually works. It's the next day, 8 hours on the clock, and they are getting ready. It's time to run, bitches. Remember, running up and down the stairs will get them more time, which will get them more money. They work hard to make that bank. They share the leftover food at the first floor. Working hard requires a little bit more fuel. And by the end of the day, they finally get to their rooms exhausted, sore, barely able to fall down on the bed or on the floor in some cases and fall asleep. But you know what? They know it's worth it. At the end of the day, they just made more money. I don't know, it kind of reminds me of the day-to-day life of majority of people. You work hard the whole day just to then eat and go to bed. Lovely. It is the next day. We see number 8, sunbathing. Remember, the person who is earning the most money per minute. I mean, she does work hard, but honestly, it doesn't really show her being that exhausted or as tired as the rest. Yet again, she's sleeping in a big mattress in a penthouse, while, for example, number 1 is sleeping in a broom closet. So, probably has something to do with the energy level. Number 7, on the other hand, is in his calculating era. He's trying to figure things out, while the rest are sharing food they are eating after the first run they did, and it starts to sink in. They are feeling effing exhausting. We also see that there is some tension when it comes to food and how much everyone gets. As number 4 is trying to pick up the last piece, number 2 quickly snatches it and looks around. She didn't do anything. Interesting though, you would not really expect that from number 2. But does everyone really act the way we would expect them to act? It does hint that in some way number 2 feels that she deserves more the food than number 4. Remember, this whole system in how they share the food is based on everyone gets their basic needs met, but for those who need more can take more. Does number 2 feel like she's doing more work because she is physically more able or capable than number 4? Number 6 is looking at everyone. He's also kind of annoyed with everything, but he has an idea. They should split in 2 groups. We see number 7 sharing the whole idea in front of the whole group. They will have 2 groups, each group working 1 day. So each person will have 1 rest day after they work. Also, the team that is working that day will have access to the leftover food, sharing the 4 leftover meal kits. Everyone likes the idea. And as number 3 reflects, it is much easier to put in more work when you know that there is rest day coming, when you know that there is a reward at the end. The question now is, how should they split into 2 groups? Should they just try, even numbers against the odd numbers, but having the 2 groups made like that? Number 2 is not feeling it, okay? She's looking at her team, number 4, number 6, and number 8, and it's not her vibe. So she's gonna go to the other team. But who from the other team would switch their place with number 2? At the end of the day, number 3 is looking at the other team and totally understands why number 2 doesn't want to be with them. They all seem a little bit prickish. Don't you find it interesting though? I myself am most definitely used to seeing people choosing teams based on what it benefits them, at least from the, shows and TV and so on. We can say that this suggests that in environments where there is no need for competition and it's more a collective effort, we do prioritize our emotional well-being and interpersonal relationships. At the end of the day, they are all working for the same thing. They are all working to increase the time they will all share. While when the environment is a little bit more competitive, when it is me against the others, then I'm choosing people who will get me there faster. Is the question then, what influences me deciding who do I want to pair with? But number 1 raises his hands and he says that he can go to the other team. He has no problem. Number 1 is at this point earning the least amount of money, but has to work harder than everyone else because he does have a disability. He is limping. Number 6 is looking at number 1 as he is approaching to their team, and it is safe to say he is not the happiest. He knows that this will be a weak link. Number 5 is ecstatic. Now they are equal. They have 2 women and 2 guys in each team. The equality. According to number 5, the equality is women and men, the same, equal. What does constitute true equality? It is true that one form of equality is the gender equality or the equality despite the gender, but that doesn't take in consideration the disabilities that one might have or just lack of abilities and skills. To emphasize that even more, the weak link in this case is a man, which challenges the notion that men are just inherently stronger and puts on the table the very fact that weakness is not automatically based on gender. In this case, despite having true equality between the number of women and men, is it about the numbers and the gender or the actual abilities and strengths? The plan is going well. And number 3 does not only feel like this plan is perfect because you work hard and then the next day you can rest. You can also stuff your face with food more, work more, eat more. We see that number 1 is struggling with his disability to walk all these stairs. And at one point, him and number 4 even kind of crash with one another. They fall back and number 1 falls on number 4. And number 4 is kind of mad about it. I mean, she gets it. He is profusely apologizing and she understands, but she almost broke her back. So please move so I can run. Don't you find it fascinating? Don't you find it so interesting how it is automatically number 1's fault just because he's the one with the disability? You see, how they actually fell was that number 4 was behind him. But because she was in her own tiredness or feeling tired, she was also not really careful where is she walking or who is in front of her. The one at fault was number 1. Not only in her eyes, but in the majority of people's eyes. We automatically assume that if someone has some kind of weakness and something goes wrong, it must be their fault, no? This whole event makes you think about 2 things. Will a weak link make others suffer? And the other, if there is a weak link, is it automatically their fault? But we do have some good people in this world and do recognize when some people are weaker. Number 6 approaches number 1 and extends his hand to help him get up. Now, number 1 feels good about it, feels good that someone came to help him. As number 6 grabs the hand of number 1, he squeezes it to the point that you can hear bones cracking. Wipe off that smile and get back to work. Get on your feet and stop wasting our time. Yep. That's it, folks. Instead of people helping you, they will even make you feel worse about what just happened. Number 7, number 2, number 3, and number 5 are looking at this whole situation. Again, number 8 is barely seen in this work. We know that she's running up the stairs, but we don't really see her much. Number 6 start walking towards them, and you can see number 3 and number 5 getting visibly scared, They move to the side so number 6 could pass. But number 2 is not having this shit. She looks number 6 straight in his eyes, walks up to him, bumps his shoulder as she's passing him, and makes him know that she is not afraid of him. She goes to number 1 and she says, "Go rest. I'm gonna take your place today." Number 1 feels bad. He doesn't want that someone else is now working instead of him. But number 2 is persistent. He can rest and she will work the double shift. On one hand, we have number 6 who sees number 1 as a liability. It's the weak link. He is just messing up our own time or my own time. While number 2 understands him. Number 2 is willing to help. You see, number 2 is closer to number 1. She gets what it is to be the small man, to get the short end of the stick. But does the solidarity of number 2 apply only to those who are lower than her? It's the next day, and the team that is running today is exhausted. But most than all, number 2 is exhausted. It's her second time running. She didn't really have a full rest day the other day. But despite number 3 telling her to sit down to have a rest, she refuses. And she proceeds to do her part of the deal. Again, the teams replace. Number 3 and number 2 are supposed to rest today. At this point, people are barely walking, let alone running. But if those who could run at the beginning can barely walk now, what is happening with those who couldn't even run in the first place? Number 1 is struggling. He is barely taking those steps. Number 3 looks up, sees how number 1 is struggling, and he is contemplating. Should I go and help him? Should I help him today because number 2 did it yesterday? Or should I take rest because I also need to rest? What should I do? What should I do? Oh my God. As he's trying to decide, number 2 gets up and starts walking to number 1. Now this makes number 3 jump up and say, no, you can sit. I'm going to go and help number 1. He passes number 2 and he yells at number 1 that he should come down and he's going to replace him today. Number 1 is a bit reluctant, but number 3 reassures him. Look, I'm good. I kind of ate a little bit too much, so it's good to burn those calories. The dilemmas of all dilemmas. Should you stand up or should you keep it to yourself? Should you offer help to other people or should you just be in the corner, take care of yourself, and kind of ignore what's happening outside? What makes us step up? Why do we need to wait for the other person to take the first step before we are comfortable to take our own? Before we are comfortable to do what's the right thing? This is something that I talked about in the competition, the Squid Game, the real competition that happened, because there was this social amnesia happening where people would not stand up to what was wrong. But if someone else does it, then we are more than willing to come together and do it also. And in most cases, it happens where there is a need to step up, to morally step up, to be ethical, to call out things that are wrong. I've said it before, but why does it take so long to expose certain people in, Hollywood at this point? Why are we so afraid to do what's the right thing? Why do we get the courage only when we see someone else doing it? There is a part of us that probably wants to do the right thing. In this case, there is a part of number 3 that wants to help number 1. But we do want to stay hidden until someone else tells us that it is okay. Does this come from insecurities that we have? The fear of judgment? The fear of what will happen to us if we say something, even though it is the right thing to say or the right thing to do? I think we are more and more conditioned, but I also feel like maybe we're changing a bit in letting the bad things just happen. Because there were many cases when calling out the bad things just made you be the bad guy. And it sucks, but if we want things to be better, we need to start building that courage again, despite of what might happen to us. We need to call out bad shit. The most interesting thing, though, is that number 3 feels so good right now. I mean, he can help someone. He can be the guy who does the right thing. It fuels him with energy. I mean, they do say that when you help other people, it makes you want to do more. They do say, though, that sometimes it's the ego, the one that is driving. The good feeling of being validated by doing the right thing. Number 3 feels like a rock star. Look at me, I am helping the poor. It adds a hint of amusement when you think about that he's level number 3. Still considered the lower part of society or this staircase system. It's also interesting how no one from the upper floor is actually helping number 1. Number 8 is barely existing. We barely see her, so she's doing the work, but we don't really see what she's doing. Number 7, kind of the same. Number 6 made it clear that he doesn't like that number 1 is in their team because he is wasting time. Number 5 is again someone that just blends in. We don't really know how is she doing. Number 4 feels annoyed that she even needs to pay attention to number 1. Like she almost fell because of him. And the only ones who are actually contemplating helping is number 3 and number 2. Interesting. In all of this, number 1 is feeling really bad. He does not like that now another participant needs to cover his shift. And it shows how the majority of us think that if someone needs to step up more because we can't. It's not that we don't want to, but in this case, number 1 literally has a disability. And also he is sleeping and living in the smallest place, earning the least amount of money. But he still feels like he's a burden to others. And on the other hand, we have number 3 who even feels like he is the king. I'm that guy who's gonna help. It's kind of fucked up, isn't it? Help because some people truly do need help. Not because it's gonna make you feel better. And the person who needs help should not feel like a burden. We are living in society where today helping someone is already considered as burden. Burden for the person who helps and burden for the person who needs help. And I'm not gonna be smart here to say that, oh, I don't ever feel like that. I'm the one who always helps, whoever needs. No, I'm not. I'm the type of person that kind of contemplates, oh my God, okay, I want to help, but also I really need to do this thing for myself. What should I do? And then when I do help, I feel like, oh my God, I did such a good job. It's not really a good job, right? It's just human decency. But that's why I like shows like this. They do make me also reflect on my own ways when it comes to day-to-day life and how I place myself in the society and how am I interacting with other people based on that. After the shift is done, we see everyone getting to number 1, or at least the team that was running. But we also see number 3 coming and number 1. I mean, it is his room. He's standing in front of room and he's kind of letting all the people in so they can share the food. It looks like number 1 also wants to enter the room. But number 4 is confused and she stops him. What? Are you gonna eat? You didn't even do the work that all of us did. Number 1 visibly is feeling bad about it. And number 4 continues. Number 3 should eat today. He's the one who did your work. Number 3 and number 5 are standing next to them. And both of them do not say a word. At the end of the day, number 4 has a point, right? Fair is fair. If he didn't do the work, why should he get the extra meal? They both just look around and kind of, this is awkward. But number 2 steps up, looks at number 4 and says, what are you tripping? Number 8 barely eats. So your team in any case gets extra food every time. Now, number 4 feels called out. And she starts to saying that she was just thinking that this is fair. Number 6 comes down, passes all of them, doesn't even acknowledge, doesn't get involved, and just goes in. Number 4 says to the rest that she doesn't want to make number 1 starve. But, what does she know? She turns around and I don't know who shut the door, but the door shuts. Mind you, this is number 1's floor. This is his room. And the people who entered to eat have the audacity to shut the door on him. Number 1, number 3, and number 5 are still standing outside, and it looks like that number 2 kind of went away from the team, but she's still somewhere in the corner. Number 1 opens the doors and he says to number 3, you go in, you were the one who was working instead of me today, so it's fair for you to go. Number 3 feels that, yeah, that's kind of fair. He doesn't say anything, but number 2 comes again. She looks at number 1 and says, what, do you think that people are helping you just to get extra food? Number 3 is standing there like his tummy is growling. He is hungry. He did work a double shift today, but because number 2 was also doing that and she does not want extra food and she is willing to give it to number 1, despite him not putting in the extra work, he kind of feels now, okay, yes, I'm not an asshole. It's okay, number 1, you can go and eat. I'm good. I'm not even that hungry anymore. Number 1 still doesn't feel really comfortable to do that, but number 5 grabs him. Number 1, let's just go. You need to eat. She turns to number 3 and she says, number 3, you are such a good guy. And she takes number 1 into the room to feed. Side note, why is number 5 entering the room to get the extra food? I don't know. That was also an interesting slip. From my understanding, she was on the resting team today. Was that a hint on how some people just sneak in their way to also get a piece of the pie without others even realizing? I don't know. But let's talk about this whole fiasco. How do you feel about the fairness of this whole thing? How do you feel if I ask you, does someone who cannot work as much as the others get less food than the rest? Think about it. The fact that number 1 has a disability in this case, even though his work was less, like he could do less, it was still as straining to him than how it was to the other participants. Yes, the others ran more, but they are also physically more capable. It is interesting how fairness totally forgets about the fact that someone cannot do it. Despite number 3 taking over, number 1 was still going up and down the stairs that day. But because he couldn't do as much, he should be denied the extra food. Was the number 3 more entitled to that food? In my personal opinion, I would say not more entitled, but equally entitled. He was also the one who was running up and down the stairs that day. How come though it was between the two of them? How come the rest of the group didn't think about that everyone should share more because today they had an extra person that was working? Well, no one wants to give up their share, right? But wait a second. What about the fact that the number 8, who was a part of the working team for today, didn't eat as much, so there was leftover food? This team had from the get-go more food because in this case, the elite ate less. How come that was not given to number 3 and number 1? It's interesting how the fight for food happened between number 3 and number 1. One who has a disability and the other one who just helped this person. At the end of the day, the battle of who will get food in this case is between the two of them. I find it very interesting how the upper levels didn't have any contribution, didn't even care about it. But what about number 2? And standing up for number 1, even going against number 3. Well, this time is shown that yes, number 2 is very helpful, but she's helpful to the people below them. And she does expect the same kind of behavior from the people who are kind of in the same range. Now, how fair is that? And how interesting it is that the lower levels, in this case, F up themselves. And they do not call out the help that could easily come from the higher levels. It almost feels like when we are maybe in the, the middleman or the lower poverty or whatever, what we expect is the ones who are closer to us to step up, to help us, to suffer more so we could potentially suffer less. But we don't have the same attitude with the people who are higher up because you can't even reach them. Like they won't even listen. They don't care. It showed that number 6 didn't even ask what's happening. He just went in. We don't even see number 7 or number 8 anywhere. It's all left to the lower levels to agree amongst themselves and sacrifice amongst themselves. Number 2 also comforts number 1 when he is reluctant to go and eat his food and he still wants to give it to number 3. Don't worry, don't fall for this petty commentary. People are just behaving that way because they are hungry and they are tired, but you should go and eat. Number 3 agrees, although his grandiose or feeling like the guy that helped didn't really feel good. I mean, at the end of the day, what did it get him? Apart from being even more tired and having an empty stomach. This does push number 3 in feeling pissed, feeling angry. Do we only do things for others when we expect benefit on the other side? He is in his room and he is mad. It is your fault that I am in this place in the first place. He's drawing the scammer that took away his money and he calls him a weasel. You're the reason why I'm even in this place. It's very interesting how when number 3 is now denied in this case, the basic needs or being rewarded for the extra work that he did, suddenly entering this show is not anymore the best decision of his life, how he felt the first time that got here. Now it's someone else's fault that he is even in this place. Now, what about number 4 and her ways of fairness? Isn't it interesting how she was so quick to call out the potential unfairness of number 1 getting to eat, while number 3 is the one who was working, but she never acknowledges that she's in any case getting the extra food or her team is getting the extra food because number 8 is not eating as much. It's interesting how despite by default getting more because they have the influence of the elite in that team, she still feels betrayed or played if number 1 would get the food. If someone who worked less will get the food, even though she herself is already getting the extra. Now, there's another thing that I found extremely interesting. You see, number 1 is the one who gets the 4 extra meal kits in his room. Number 1 at this point has the power to hijack this food, to lock his room, to not let anyone in. But how come no one feels like that will ever happen? How come everyone is so entitled to his room that they don't even think that he has the power to take that food? Well, they know that the guy down is even grateful that he gets any food because they have the power to stop it even further up. They have the leverage to trust number 1 because he also trusts or has to give trust for them to send the food even down. But which trust is more fragile? Who would be the first one who would easily cut off the food if they wanted to? The upper floor or the lower floor? You see, there is some hint of lower levels being much more moral and ethical. They would never deny food to someone else. They would never not help another person, while the upper floors have a little bit of a different attitude. Number 4 is an even special Twinkie though. She is technically closer to lower floors than she is to the upper floors. And yet, she is not a part of the lower team and she helps number 2, number 1, or number 3. No, she makes her way closer to the upper floors, number 5, 6, 7, and 8. You always have that one person in, right? It almost feels like despite the system already effing up the lower floors, right? They are earning less, they are working harder, and they are living worse. The ones who will make them suffer even more are the ones who have it just a little bit better. Number 4 doesn't even find it fair that despite her having a little bit better, now she needs to help the lower levels. I mean, people, I'm struggling to even get up to get it a little bit better than what I'm having. Now you're asking me to help the people behind me? There's a noise though. Dumb waiter is here. What is it? What are they sending down? He opens the doors and it is bags full of shit. That's right. The upper floors are sending shit in bags down to now the third floor. There's a knock on the door and it's number 2. She informs him that number 1 decided to do this. He felt bad that other people were working more despite him not being able to do it, and he wanted to offer something in return. Mind you, he is still working. He is not resting. He's still working, but he's working less. He's working as much as he can. But because he cannot work as much as the others, and he doesn't want to be, unfair or that people would be mad at him, he offered that he will store shit from everyone in his tiny room. He wants to make sure that he also plays a role in the system so people don't feel like they're doing something extra for him. Now, it is funny that he offered himself to store shit, but metaphorically, doesn't usually the shit of many become a burden of the smaller man? To be honest, when I watched that, it made me feel so sad. I felt so much for what was happening because this is a person who has a disability. He's making the least amount of money, but the others are expecting him to work the same amount as them despite not being even able to. And because he cannot fulfill that, he is willing to put up with their shit, metaphorically and literally. He wants to feel valuable in this community. And it's interesting how people also make sure that he will feel valuable if he takes their shit. But he's not valuable otherwise. Otherwise, he's just a burden. Now, one interpretation, as I mentioned, is the system, the society, right? How usually the people that are on lower levels need to put up with whatever shit or the shit of the world while the upper elites have things cleaned, live more comfortably. For example, while an owner of a company is making millions, the worker is barely surviving, but working much more. He's doing the shit that the upper level doesn't want to deal with. On the other hand, it makes me think of literal shit or garbage. I've traveled in many places, but you don't need to travel to know that countries that are less developed have serious issue with garbage. Even in places that are more developed, the places who are considered as a more high society or middle upper level areas are much cleaner than the ones who are in poverty. Now you can ask many questions, right? Why is the garbage such a difficult thing to recycle, manage, and so on? And why does it seemingly just gets dumped in places that are less developed or the places that have more poverty? Well, shit sometimes needs to go somewhere. And as long as you make the people who are in those middle upper levels feel good, not seeing the shit, then somehow you will still control the society. As of now, there is still more people who can survive in a normal kind of way and less people who are in poverty. At least that's how we see it. But, in developed countries, we might even say that there is a difference of how many people are in actual poverty and how many people are just reaching that minimum level that they can still enjoy a clean street. But you maybe even experience in places where garbage is not handled correctly, and it's usually less developed countries, the behavior of people sometimes makes you think, well, no wonder there's garbage everywhere. Everyone is just throwing their shit wherever they can throw. But how much would you actually care about throwing paper on the floor when all you can think about is even survival? Now, I try to understand if people are even watching this show and, any other commentaries. And there is like a Reddit post not much is said, but people were kind of talking about the plot holes. Not many were actually talking about the messages of the show when it comes to society. But they were kind of annoyed that the plot hole was that people even needed to store the shit somewhere. Like, why don't they just store it in the common places? The common spaces were big, right? So they could just put it in the corner and no one would have to deal with it. But that's not how things work, do they? You see, when you have your own shit, there is no problem storing it in the comfort of your four walls. You don't want others to see your shit. You don't want your shit to just be displayed for everyone. So if the option is, I'm going to put my shit in front of everyone versus I'm going to keep my shit in my room, I think we both know where we are going with this. But the fact that there is a solution where all their shit could go to someone else's closed door, behind someone else's closed door, then that's okay. I don't mind if my shit is seen by someone who is lower than me. I think that was the point of not storing shit in the common spaces. It would be too obvious if that was just a bad writing. I think it actually showed us how we behave when it comes to shit or our own shit. We don't want everyone to see it, but we have no problem if those who don't really matter see it. So we see everyone sending down their shit, and as expected, number 4 is excited about it. Yes, she can get rid of her shit in her room and send it to number 1. Number 3 is a bit more reluctant, but he still does it, and he's thinking that at the end of the day, it's fair. Right now, it does seem that their group is forming a little bit more of a complex system. Those who have smaller appetites share more food. Yes, because if number 8 would need more food, she would eat more food. Are they just lucky that she doesn't eat much, so then she actually sends the food down? Those who are physically stronger can do the harder tasks, and those who aren't built that way can fulfill other important roles. All in all, now they have a decent setup, and they even have their own sanitary man. It is a bit amusing how number 3 always tries to look at what makes sense objectively, what is logical. And it almost shows him as this naive person who just, whatever is happening, he's like, oh, okay, yes, this makes sense. Okay, yes, this makes sense. Does it really though? Does it? Number 2 does not send her shit down. And if I'm not mistaken, also number 7 doesn't send his shit down. But I think it will be really revealed later in the show. It also shows us that we can do better. We don't need to do these things even though someone offers it. Even though number 1 feels bad about his own contributions and is offering to store everyone's shit, right? I don't have to give my burden to someone who is suffering even more than I am. It does offer on how we could be better in society and towards those who are less fortunate. We also see number 8 easily sending down food, water, and shit in her dumb waiter. You see, for her, it's not a problem. She gets the food, she takes what she needs, and then she just sends it down with a bag of her shit. She even puts a little heart and thank you to number 1. And number 1, seeing that little bag with the heart and saying thank you does not make him feel that good. Now, I want to poke a little bit at this. You see, number 8, in this case, a reference to high society or the upper floors, the ones that earn the most, don't care about anything, she's sending the least amount of shit. She is contributing, seemingly, the least to how much shit number 1 gets, right? She was also not a part of conversations when it comes to sharing of food, what is fair, him offering this, blah, blah, blah. It almost shows us how, at the end of the day, despite number 8 having the most power. It's the lower floors that make their lives even worse. Because while number 8 doesn't care about others, number 1 feels in debt to others because he cannot work as much as them, despite earning 30 times less than number 8. But then it makes you think, does number 1 even have any real choice at this point? If people are mad at him if he doesn't offer something, how long before they make him starve? How long before they start beating him, hitting him, ganging up on him because he has a disability? It almost feels like that this is the only option to protect himself. But does he protect himself? Do lower floors ever really get protection? Or are they all at the mercy of the upper floors? We've talked about shit, but this shit is about to go down. And we're going to talk about it in the next video. This show is bonkers, but it is so reflective, and it makes you really look at some things and be like, what the fuck? All in all, the one thing we need to do, at least at this level, is to trust your individuality.